bring in the former NFL quarterback, star from Notre Dame, Brady Quinn, works for Fox Sports, their college football analyst. How did you celebrate the Cleveland Browns win last night, Brady?
Well, it's pretty late. I've got 3 little girls, so usually we're exhausted by it, but I was excited about it. I actually think my wife's mad at me this morning. I kept her up, made sure she understood the historical significance of the Browns winning that playoff game, and I've been in the doghouse ever since she woke up this morning.
Okay, but explain that to people. You're a former first-round pick with this franchise. It feels like once you're a Brown, you're always going to be a Cleveland Brown the rest of your life, no matter if you play for another team.
Well, and part of it, too, for me is I grew up in a northwest suburb of Columbus. And so I rooted for all the Cleveland teams growing up. And so getting drafted there was a dream come true. But even afterwards, things didn't work out the way I wanted to or wish they could have. But I've still remained a fan of the team. And obviously, I can relate to that fan base. I think the struggle when the team left and moved to Baltimore and then came back, for a lot of fans, a lot of people in Cleveland, it's not the same team as far as what left. And so now we've finally gotten to a position where I feel like from an organizational standpoint, they're at a different point. They found a head coach that I know it's only 1 year, but I think it'd be hard to argue that this team isn't heading in the right direction. Obviously, Baker's playing some of his best football, and really the team's playing inspired. And that's just something that, you didn't see consistently over the course of really the last 2 decades.
How do the Browns beat the Chiefs?
Well, I think the biggest thing you've got to do, especially with an offense that can score the way they do, is you've got to find a way of one, playing really good red zone defense. You got to figure out, you can't just give up the big play for a touchdown. You got to go to that shortened, condensed portion of the field and figure out a way of getting off forcing field goals. If you can do that, and then on the other side, I think you can make the case that, you can try to eat up the clock and win the time of possession. We saw the Colts try to do that this past weekend versus the Bills, but in the end, it's not going to win. Because if the Bills have the ball last, they're going to end up winning the football game, or more often than not, be able to put up enough points once they do find their rhythm. So I think you almost have to look at what the Raiders did this year when they beat the Chiefs. You've got to be able to go toe for toe, blow for blow with them, and you got to be able to stretch the field, run the football, make all those big plays too, and not be scared offensively to take some chances. So to me, it just comes down to eliminated big plays, red zone defense, and offensively, taking some risks, taking some chances, trying to throw all you can at the Kansas City Chiefs defense, which is improved this year compared to what they were last year.
We'll talk about the national title game here in a moment. I'm curious because you got Breeze and Brady, and you got Rodgers, you got Roethlisberger. I don't know if a team is more apt to make a decision 1 year early than 1 year late when it comes to these older quarterbacks, because everybody wants to have their Mahomes or Deshaun Watson or Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. Like, there's so many of these great, talented young players coming out that I don't know if I'm Indy that I go, let me have Phillip Rivers again, or Pittsburgh, and let me have Ben. Breeze in New Orleans. Brady obviously will be back if he wants to be back, but can you see that philosophy in the NFL?
Well, yeah, I could see the philosophy. I mean, I think from an economical standpoint, especially as you look into next year, not necessarily knowing what the cap is going to be. I mean, the floor we know is, $175 million. It could be a little bit higher than that. We'll have to wait and see. But from an economical standpoint, you could understand why they'd maybe want to get younger and cheaper. But there's a big risk in that, right? I mean, is your fan base going to be okay with having to go through a rebuilding process potentially and being patient with that quarterback position? I do think the one thing, though, that you look at now with quarterbacks coming into the league, and it was pretty apparent in that Tampa Bay Bucks Washington football team game, is the ability for a quarterback with mobility to impact a game. I mean, that is now becoming a must for and requirement for any quarterback coming into the NFL right now, is the ability to keep the football and run and pick up a few first downs and challenge the defense to have to situationally, at a minimum, put someone out there who is responsible for them. And we saw Taylor Heinicke be able to kind of keep the Washington football team in that game, in part because of his athleticism. So when you're talking about the Rivers, the Roethlisbergers, the Bradys, the Brees, none of those are the older age drop back, prototypical, drop back quarterbacks. You don't see that so much anymore coming in the NFL. So I think if you're going to make that change, yes, part of it's economical, but the other thing is a little bit schematic too, with the type of players that are now coming into the NFL.
He's Brady Quinn, working for Fox Sports, their college football analyst. Tonight's national title game will come down to?
Well, it's going to come down to whether or not Ohio State can limit the amount of big plays that this Alabama offense can create. I mean, we saw that throughout the course of the season, but in particular in the semifinal game versus my alma mater. And then on the flip side, I think Justin Fields has to have a similar game to what he had in the semifinal game, which was his best game as a college quarterback. So if he can go toe for toe, or again, blow for blow, like I mentioned earlier in the NFL games, but if he can do that versus this Alabama offense, I think they stand a chance. But the biggest question mark right now, Dan, is, how big of an impact COVID will have potentially on the D-line and how healthy Justin Fields is going to be with that rib injury that he's dealing with.
What is Alabama's weakness?
To me, I think it's their defense. I think we saw glimpses of that this year, and you've even heard their head coach, Nick Saban, admit it, that this is not, a game anymore that's dominated by, great defense being able to stop great offenses. At times they can. And I think they've even had to kind of adapt to, a bend but don't break at times, philosophy on how they're playing defensively. I mean, Pat Surtain's going to take away one wide receiver for Ohio State, but there's plays to be made on the other side of the field versus the secondary for Alabama. I don't think they have, as good of an edge rusher either. So to me, if you're looking at, the biggest difference right now, I think for Bama, it's that their defense isn't what we're accustomed to seeing. And maybe you want to say that's a product of their offense being so explosive. But for me, I think it's just more of the changing of times with college football. The offense has the advantage. Eventually, the defense will adjust, but we just haven't seen that of late.
Which running back has to have the bigger game, Najee Harris or Trey Sermon?
Trey Sermon, just because I think you look at what, again, not knowing the injury to Fields, but you look at how important it is for the Iowa State offense to have balance. That, to me, is crucial in this game. Because I do think Surtain can take away Chris Olave, which basically leaves Garrett Wilson and some other targets too. But it's a lot of pressure on Garrett Wilson to be able to carry that. And Olave missed the Big Ten championship game versus Northwestern, and Howard Fields playing that one. So that's a concern for me. I mean, this Pat Surtain kid, he doesn't get enough credit. This is going to be one of the top prospects taken in next year's draft. And talking to the Notre Dame coaching staff before the semifinal game, they're like, if we throw at this kid, it's a mistake, okay? Like Ian Book made a mistake if they throw his way, and they did once, and it would have been an interception if Surtain got his foot in bounds, but he didn't. So I think you've got to have that balance. You've got to have the ability to run the football, and also to potentially give their defense a bit of a break and not have to have them out on the field all the time trying to cover, the Heisman Trophy winner in Smith, and if Waddle plays, but all the other playmakers they have with Najee Harris too in the backfield.
Isn't it amazing that Waddle was considered the better prospect coming into this season? Devonta Smith wins the Heisman. Yeah,
I mean, and give him credit for the way he stepped up when Waddle went down. A lot of guys sometimes maybe fade in that, or they can't handle the fact that they're seeing the best cornerback. They're seeing maybe more cloud coverage or bracket coverage at times. But again, going back to that semifinal game versus Notre Dame, talking to some of the coaches with that staff, one of the things that was mentioned to me was you don't realize how fast he is until you get out there on the field, because he's this smooth, long strider, and you think you've got a good angle on him, and next thing you know, he slides up the sidelines or he's running across the field, and you end up missing a tackle, or you end up not even being able to get a hand on him. So that's going to be the challenge for Ohio State. And look, they've got talented wide receivers who have speed, but they don't move the same way as that Slim Reaper, as they call him, in Devonta Smith, and the way he kind of slides around and smoothly gets yards after the catch. So, and that's the thing for Ohio State's defense. Dan, when you're watching the film from the Clemson game, I thought they missed Tony Elliott a lot, because there was times when they had the 10 or 20-yard range completion all game long. Ohio State was willing to concede that, but whether it was Brendan Streeter or Dabo Swinney, they didn't want to adapt or change that game plan to allow Trevor Lawrence just to pick them apart on the sidelines to the outside. That kind of plays to Mac Jones' wheelhouse. And this is the worst pass defense we've ever seen in the national championship game in the college football playoff era, giving about 280-plus yards a game. So it's going to be tough for this Buckeye secondary to stop Alabama's passing attack.
I remind people a lot of times that Usain Bolt might be the fastest man in the history of mankind, but he didn't have top-end speed for the first 60 yards, first 60 meters. Devonta Smith would probably beat Usain Bolt in a 60-yard dash, in my opinion. Like the ability to get to a top-end speed, because Bolt, once he got to 60, if you weren't ahead of him, then you weren't going to beat him. And I know that's, Joey Galloway, an Ohio State guy. There's certain guys who have top-end speed, like Tyreek Hill.
Right.
Tyreek Hill to me, if he's with Usain Bolt, would beat him for the first 60 meters. He wouldn't beat him for 100, but he'd beat him for 60 there. These receivers who get, you're looking at me like I'm crazy. You think
you just said Usain Bolt, who may be the fastest human being in my lifetime. And so I don't know if I'm going to co-sign with that. I understand what you're saying, though. He's a taller, longer strider. Waddle, for example, one of the reasons why he's, a better prospect, if you will, is because he gets 0 to 100
How about
faster.
this? Devonta Smith is a better receiver than Usain Bolt. Would you agree with me on that?
Yeah.
We'll start.
I would hope so.
We'll
hope
start.
so.
But you've been around guys who have great speed, but they're guys who have like they get to their top gear quicker than the other guy does. And Devonta Smith, that's the difference. Like when he gets it out on the side and you go, okay, you got him. And then he has that next gear that very few players have in all the sports.
Well, and that's why I'm always, wondering, especially like Shaun Wade, for example, who's the best cornerback at Ohio State. And you didn't see them do this much in the semifinal game, and they've kind of limited how much press man-to-man coverage they play. But usually when you've got a guy who's like a longer strider like you're talking about and doesn't get 0 to 100, in a few steps, you'd like to get some hands on him at the line of scrimmage, disrupt the timing, and see if you can stop him before he ever gets started, right?
Yeah.
And you don't see that quite as much. And again, go back to the semifinal game, watch some of the tape. You'll see them playing 8-10 yards off and willing to concede some of those passes in front of them as long as they don't give up a big play. I don't know that that's a recipe for success versus Alabama and Devonta Smith, because once he gets going, it's not only the fact that he's got that second gear, he's so smooth in and out of his cuts. When he wants to set up a double move, he can really sell it because of just the way he's able to cut while still having that long stride, that gait, but then get back up to full speed or kick in that second gear as you're talking about.
Did Ohio State offer you a scholarship?
They did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But why'd you pass?
Oh, geez. There's a number of reasons. I thought Notre Dame and Michigan was the other school I was looking at. Notre Dame was the best fit for me. One thing that always kind of laid in the back of my mind in looking at all three schools was, who was the best NFL quarterback to have come from each school. And obviously Michigan's got a rich history, arguably the greatest of all time in Tom Brady, and there's a lot of others. Notre Dame, you could throw that into that category with Joe Montana and Theismann and Meyer and so many others. Ohio State, I would probably say Art Schlichter. I mean, I'm not sure who else you throw into that category, but that was something that was always going on in the back of my mind, outside of the fact that, it was a smaller school. Academically, it fit more what I was looking to get out of the education.
Could you have taken the heat, though, Brady, coming from Columbus, Ohio, going to Michigan?
Well, Bo Schembechler asked me that question. I was with my dad on a recruiting visit, and the first thing he said when I think it was might have been Tom Herman was a linebacker coach at the time. He was my area recruiter. He introduced my father and I, and he said that he's from Columbus, Ohio, and he's looking at coming to Michigan. And Bo Schembechler looks at me and says, "Are you ready to go in there and kick those Buckeyes' ass?" And my dad was done. He was like, "You're going to Michigan." And I was like, all right, let's hold on for a second. So that was one of the cooler stories and moments I got to share with my dad along those recruiting visits.
But Notre Dame gave you a nicer car, so you ended up at South Bend.
I wish that was the case. You hear about that stuff all the time.
Were you offered, we'll take away any school names.
Yeah. What
was the best thing you were offered?
I wasn't offered anything. I don't know that I look like the type of guy that, and based on my family, a hardworking middle-class family, like, I don't know that they were walking into our household saying like, "Hey, what do you need?" And plus, like, my parents would have never accepted that. I was someone who had a job throughout the course of my time at Notre Dame. I worked at the Caleb Center there on campus and the Office of News and Information in the Golden Dome, just to have a little extra grocery money, gas money, and just a little money to get around. I used to take the linemen to this Italian restaurant that had an all-you-can-eat buffet on the south side of town, and I think it was like $8 a pop. And we would basically on Thursday nights go watch football and see who could eat the most chicken parm cutlets.
Oh, they lost money on you guys when you guys came in. All you could eat for $8 a pop?
I was out eating Ryan Harris. You can ask Ryan Harris. He used to call me a snake for basically waiting all day to eat dinner just to out-eat him that night.
Great to talk to you. Have fun tonight. We appreciate your time as always, Brady.
Always a pleasure, guys. Have a great day.
That's Brady Quinn, former Cleveland Browns quarterback.